Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear viewers, Assalamu alaikum. I'm your host Faisal Raza Khan and you are watching Foresight. Viewers, as you know, the general elections 2024 held and whole of the nation elected their representatives with the hope that there will be a political as well as the much needed economic stability across the country. As you all know that these elections given a split mandate to the political parties, but despite of all difficulties, formation of the government is on its way. Here several challenges are waiting for the incumbent government, and the huge challenge is the economic recovery. How this economic recovery will be translated into actions, and particularly the promises which were done in the manifestos, how they are going to be the reality. Of course, there is a IMF Pakistan standby arrangement which is going on, and how it is going to be accomplished. Along with that, there would be a new agreement with the IMF and Pakistan, how it is going to be in the real sense. So, talking about all these aspects of Pakistan's economy and its relation with IMF, we are talking to this important aspect, and to get answers of these important questions which are arises, we have in our studios Dr. Usman Chohan. He is a senior analyst. Most welcome to you, Dr. Usman.
Thank you.
And online we have joining us Ahsan Hamid Durrani. He is the policy analyst and he is also the director Policy Research Center. Most welcome to you, Ahsan. My first question to you, Dr. Usman, that how political stability is inevitable for economic stability in the country?
It's an excellent question. It's the most important question, because if you don't have a stable environment and a long-term vision, then you cannot realize the important tasks that we have to do as a society. Our economy now requires tough decisions, which means that everybody has to be on board. The people have to be on board, the leadership has to be on board. And if they are not of one mind, then there will be too many disagreements and things will stall. But we cannot kick the can down the road forever. Ultimately, we have to make important reforms that generate indigenous growth. And that requires the leadership to be in full agreement about what needs to be done.
So, when we are talking about that, how this existing standby arrangement with IMF and the prospects of a fresh agreement from the new government. So, how do you see such aspects, and how much time left we have, because ultimately this new government has also placed a budget which is going to be impossible if you don't have the much funds available.
That's a very good point. So a review is coming up at the end of February or the beginning of March, and that will look back at the recent work done by the caretaker
You're talking
government.
about the standby agreement related to the review.
Precisely. Precisely. So the standby agreement that was concluded between the government and the IMF had put some very tough strictures, some things that had to be implemented which were unpalatable at the time, but through patience and through responsible stewardship, they have materialized. Therefore, because we took the bitter pill and the caretaker government was very serious about getting things done, I believe that our performance is more than satisfactory. And therefore, when the IMF does its review soon, it will look at the benchmark set through mutual understanding and agreement and the level of achievement that was done in it. There are some things, such as excessive borrowing through the banking sector by the government, which are of concern. But overall, it seems that many issues are being taken extremely seriously and progress was made. One issue I think that will be of concern is the circular debt, because this caretaker government has taken very serious consideration of concluding this once and for all, to liberate the people from this unusual cycle of perpetuating debt. But the IMF is not too keen on the proposal made, in my reading.
We'll talk about the circular debt issue later on, but also here it is important point that what's your perspective that how this upcoming new agreement would be the new agreement, how much broad it would be, how much far-sighted, the long-term and reform-centric this new agreement would be, whatever the new government and the IMF is going to negotiate among each other?
it's a very important question to look at, foreseeing where the agreement will lead. So there are generally two types of agreements with the IMF. Some tend to be more stabilization, short-term standby agreements like the one we have had recently and still in process. And then there are longer-term programs. Now, oftentimes a standby agreement is a precursor to having the longer-term thing. Now, is that something that we're aiming for? Yes, according to our caretaker finance minister, it is necessary. It is necessary to have one more program to set the ground running under a more stable foundation. Now, if that is the case, then it will be more steps to take. Standby agreements tend to be very tight, short-term and intense, whereas long-term agreements tend to have difficult stipulations, but they tend to be spread across a wider horizon or a longer-term period.
Okay.
Therefore, I think that the IMF will put tough contingencies, but it should very likely express a strong satisfaction with what has been done thus far in the standby agreement.
So, Ehsan, when we are talking about the political leadership, how do you envisage that, how much urge and how much will they have to cooperate on the economic issues, particularly for the stability of economy, and it is regardless of their role as a government or as opposition? Do you think that they would be on one page and they will cooperate for this economic stability to get out of the mess which the people of Pakistan are actually confronting from the last many years?
Yeah, I think that's a very important question, Faisal. Well, ideally, all the political parties should have economic reform agenda on the top of their priority. But the current formation of the government that we are seeing is actually, they have a split majority. There will be a strong opposition in the National Assembly. One thing is we need to see very critically and keenly is that although the PMLN government will have their will form the government and will have their prime minister, and People Party has agreed to support them and sit on the Treasury bench but not become a part of the government, it is important to see that to which extent will People Party support the reform agenda of PMLN, because when you talk about economic reforms, there are a lot of different diverging issues between PMLN and People Party. For example, PMLN is pro-privatization, while People Party is not in the favor of privatization. And a lot of international economic institutions have agreed that privatization, especially of the state-owned enterprises, which are costing us billions of rupees each year just in subsidies, should be done and should be on the priority of the upcoming government. And it is a political cost that any upcoming government has to pay in, for the long-term economic sustainability of our economy. So this is one of the things that is a diverging issue between, or a polarizing issue between these two parties. So to which extent the ruling parties support each other, I mean the People Party and the PMLN, should be seen. Then again comes the point of the new agreement with IMF. It will also be critical, and I think IMF will be looking at reforms in the tax base, especially reforming the FBR and how we collect our taxes and expanding our tax base. I think in the coming government, because we are seeing that SIFC has taken a very prominent role in economic decision making. So I think I foresee that there will be a more proactive role of SIFC, and we can see that there could be some reforms in the taxation system in the upcoming few months when this government is in power. But overall, I think by and large there will be political differences on the issues of economy, on the issues of privatization. It will not be a very
so
easy ride.
Ehsan, taking your point at this juncture particularly, do you think that strong opposition as versus a weak government, so when the government is going to have some sort of a bold or tough or painful political decisions to get country out of the crisis or to follow the IMF reforms. Do you think that it is going to be a such like scenario?
Well, I think with regards to IMF reforms, because those decisions are predominantly taken at the federal level. So I think I don't see any major hurdle from the opposition towards those issues, and I think by and large, I think most of the political parties are aligned on getting the IMF deal and propelling or putting the economy on the right tracks. I don't see any major hurdles towards that, but there will be. I mean, if, for example, if you're going for structural reforms in the economy, irrespective of the recommendations of the IMF, those reforms would see opposition from not just from the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, but also Pakistan People Party as well, and other smaller parties.
So your point well taken. As Hassan said, that as the People's Party has the manifesto and they were against the privatization, but to protect the workers' rights. And on the other hand, Pakistan Muslim League, Nawaz, they actually wants to have privatization. And this is the same agenda what the SIFC is actually surfacing, what IMF is focusing. They want that state-owned enterprises and all others must have to perform, otherwise they must have to be privatized. So how do you see this aspect overall?
Yes, I think this is a very important area of debate because you do have two opposing ideologies vis-a-vis private and public. Now, the PPP will want, because its supporter base is premised on state-owned workers, pretty much, and the PML is premised strongly on the business community of northern Punjab. So they have very different attitudes towards state-owned enterprises, and unfortunately, this is not for us specifically, but across the developing world, that state-owned enterprises tend to be lethargic, they tend to be too large, they tend to have too much of a cost burden, primarily because of labor, and so they end up being a significant fiscal burden on the government. Now, if you're a hydrocarbon economy and you are just printing money because you extract energy, you can put up with this. But a country like Pakistan has to be much more dynamic, and it has to have market forces pushing for better service quality for the people. State-owned enterprises now have balance sheets that are too large compared to the public value they create, and therefore privatization is the way going forward in general. And there has been very serious work done, for example, by aviation, Ministry of Aviation, and by other important ministries in the caretaker prerogative to optimize this so that the burden on the fiscal system doesn't become excessive over the next few years, because we do have a lot of liabilities coming due. And if this...
You're talking about liabilities, so for the next government, the uphill task would be the debt servicing, because you know that there are more than $70 billion the Pakistan has to retire, and at least $24 billion or more than that Pakistan has to repay this year alone. So how do you see this aspect, because it is going to be a huge task?
Yes, and I expect the PPP to have some cogent explanation for the contradiction between their desire to keep things in the public mandate and inefficient, and at the same time have some solution for retiring the debt. Those people in government who understand the fiscal burden and need to prepare budgets understand the need for privatization. Those that have other values and agendas do not understand this, and they then therefore have to come up with more lucid manifestos and more clear plans for the public to understand why these things still exist in the form that they do.
So definitely when we are talking about Pakistan's progress, it is important that our economy must have to be export-led. And when we are talking about exports, it is important that there must have to be trade reforms, trade liberalization, and trade diversification. I am asking this question time and again. So what about this aspect? Because this is important if we just get out of these IMF programs and all that.
Absolutely. But the hurdles for exporters now are so large that it is difficult to compete in the global market. And I can give you various levels of that. You start from the very top, which requires aggregate demand in the global economy to be high. But my prediction, this is my personal view, but it is supported by some leading indicators, is that the recession globally has been postponed in 2023, which is supposed to manifest now in 2024 because they've kicked the can down the road and now a recession may hit. If it does, that means that the global demand for our exports will be low.
So what about the fiscal discipline and to reduce borrowing and to control inflation? Because these are the important benchmarks and the questions for the next government.
Fiscal discipline will require taking tough measures, including privatization, so everybody needs to be on board. As you see the synthesis between all this happening. Fiscal discipline is necessary and needs to be an important part of the budget, and it's not just on the taxation side. Our conversation tends to be on taxes, but then even in taxes you need to be more tax breadth than tax depth oriented. But the real side is the expenditure. And where are you spending the money that you're taxing? Because it is ultimately people like you and I that are paying those taxes.
Obviously.
A burden is excessive and undue on decent salaried people. And I think it needs to be spread out much better, asking the question, where is this ultimately going to be spent and how? If it is targeted towards the poor, the disenfranchised, and it raises the caliber of society overall, then that is acceptable for us. But if it isn't, then one has to question, why are we being taxed so excessively, and to what end, and for whom? That's really the problem, I think.
Your point well taken. Ahsan, when we are talking about Pakistan's progress, it is important that we have to address the youth population, which is 63% of the whole population. So we have just talked a lot about it, but the practical steps we haven't taken yet. So how do you see that why we are not translating our promises into actions when it comes to the youth population?
Well, I think that's a very, very important question. Pakistan has a demographic opportunity. All the while the global population, especially in the global north, the populations are going in decline. Pakistan's population growth is above 2%, and we have, as you mentioned, more than 60% of our population is youth. It has the potential to become the backbone of this economy if it is equipped with the right skills, opportunities, and infrastructure, and an environment for business and jobs. Currently, Pakistan's unemployment rate stands the highest in South Asia and in the larger Asia region as well. These are the questions and these are the challenges that the upcoming government will face. The PMLN government in the past has done some good work by providing these laptops and connectivities to youth to participate in the digital economy. But I think those initiatives won't cut it this time. There needs to be a broader consensus on increasing on our IT exports. Currently, they stand at $3 billion annually. There is a potential of taking it to $10 billion. We are seeing that our neighboring countries, they have capitalized on this wave of IT, and they have substantially helped their economies grow just with the help of IT exports. So these are the things that needs to be. Also, I think in our higher education, we need some reforms. Our curriculum is, unfortunately to say, it is outdated. It is not in cohorts with the market demands. Our technical education and vocational training system, which we call the TEVET, is outdated. Still, if I go to, because I have served on the board of directors of TEVET in the past, if you still go to some of the technical colleges in far-flung areas, they're using still Pentium 3, Pentium 4, Pentium 2 computers. These are the things that need very serious considerations. Our education system overall needs to be updated, especially the public sector education. We need to put in more money, more trainings, more capacity building, more reforms into the education sector.
Ahsan, very right. You have elaborated well. Dr. Usman, when we are talking about, as Ahsan is saying, that we are not actually capitalizing the real potential of Pakistan's youth. Along with that, when we are talking about, you were earlier having the opinion about the energy sector, because we have ample opportunities to have the cheap energy, but unfortunately it is very costly right now, and the perpetual cycles of load shedding and all that. So how we can get rid of this high electricity unit prices, along with the expensive energy, the circular debt, which is now eating like a termite, and all the resources which are available. So how do you see whether we have to just revise all those agreements with the IPPs, independent power producers, or we have to have some sort of any other solution for that?
It's the core question. As we have conversed before, there is in every society some issue that becomes too untenable as it is, and for some reason, while every other society solves it, that particular society cannot. In America, it is healthcare. That every developed country did it, but America somehow has paroxysm and cannot solve it. Similarly, we have a paroxysm in our energy sector. So when you look at the chain from the generation to transmission, distribution to consumption, you see there's problems all across the way.
Yes,
unfortunately. Unfortunately. So in the transmission side, it is the line losses. In the generation side, it is the cost, it is the agreements, it's the materials, the substance that we use to generate electricity. Now, the caretaker government understands the entire problem. It holistically has looked at it, and it has posited something to the IMF, but the IMF doesn't seem, in my reading, too keen to have this. And that's the problem, because when you are bound by some agreement, you cannot take all of the measures required. You have to do it in a certain manner, and that certain manner is not suitable for us. So when I look at our circular debt issue, I think that tough measures have to be taken, keeping in mind the whole chain of generation down to consumption, understanding also how energy is used in our society. And I think that it is not a very efficient way to do it. For example, much of the growth in our electricity over the past 30 years has been just to cool homes in the summers. Essentially, it's not industrial production per se. So we have to look at even the design of our homes. We have to look at the design of our roads as opposed to mass transit. We have to look at all the deep questions while looking at generation sources.
Means we have to restructure our structures, really.
We have to restructure our structures, absolutely right.
So what about the trillion rupees of circular debt? Every passing movement we have a monster there, and we have to repay.
Yes, I think that this is basically now an bomb. It is now so large, and its fallout is so large across the economy that it's better to take the brunt as soon as possible. Otherwise, imagine how the every orbit in the circular motion tends to be larger than the previous iteration. Therefore, 10 years down the road, we won't be talking in trillions, we might be talking quadrillions, an impossible number.
Thank you very much, Dr. Usman Chohan, for your presence in the studios. Thank you very much for your elaborated way. Thank you. So nice of you.